I want to practice my English language by reading out loud, and I find such a beautiful and eye-opening and blessed article written by John Piper. So I want to read this to encourage you, if you want, to follow Christ and to share this huge and blissful message. So here is go. His suffering sparked a movement. David Brainerd, 1780 1749 47, sorry. Articles by John Piper, founder and teacher, desiringgod.org. April 20, 2018. His life was short, 29 years, 5 months, and 19 days. And only 8 of those years as a Christian, only 4 as a missionary, and yet few lives have sent ripples so far and so wide as David Brainerd's. Why has his life made the impact that it has? Why did John Wesley say, "Let every preacher read carefully over the life of David Brainerd"? Why did William Carey regard Jonathan Edwards' life of David Brainerd as precious and holy? Why did Henry Martyn, missionary to India and Persia, write as a student in Cambridge in 1802, "I long to be like him"? Life of David Brainerd 4, page 4. Why has this life had such a remarkable influence? Or perhaps I should pose a more modest and manageable question. Why does it have such an impact on me? Why has it helped me to press on into ministry and to strive for holiness and divine power and fruitfulness in my life? The answer is that Brainerd's life is a vivid, powerful testimony to the truth that God can and does use weak, sick, discouraged, beat down, lonely, struggling saints who cry to Him day and night to accomplish amazing things for His glory. There is great fruit in the afflictions. To illustrate this, we will look first at Brainerd's struggles, then at how he responded to them, and finally at how God used him with all his weaknesses. Brainerd's struggles. 300 years ago today, Brainerd was born on April 20, 1718, in Haddam, Connecticut, and was converted at age 21. During his third year at Yale, where he was preparing for pastoral ministry, someone overheard the zealous Brainerd say that one of his tutors had no more grace than a chair. The Great Awakening had already created tension between awakened students and the seemingly less spiritual faculty and staff. And Brainerd, despite being at the top of his class, has summarily expelled. Through talk, he tried again and again over the next several years to make things right. Yale never readmitted him. God had another plan for Brainerd. Instead of a quiet 6 years, in the pastorate or lecture hall, followed by death and little historical impact for Christ's kingdom. God meant to drive him into the wilderness that he might suffer for his sake and have an incalculable influence on the history of missions. A broken body. Brainerd struggled with almost constant sickness. He had to drop out of college for some weeks because he had begun to cough up blood in 1740. In May 1744, he journaled, rode several hours in the rain through the howling wilderness. All through I was so disordered in body that little or nothing but blood came from me. Life of David Brainerd, 247 page. Now and again he would write something like, "In the afternoon my pain increased exceedingly and was obliged to betake myself to bed, was sometimes almost bereaved of the exercise of my reason by the extremity of pain." 253. In May of 1747, at Jonathan Edwards' house, the doctors told him that he had incurable consumptions and did not have long to live. Page 447. Edwards comments that in the week before Brainerd died, he told me it was impossible for Annie to conceive of the distress he felt in his breast. He manifested much concern lest he should dishonor God by impatience under his extreme agony, which was such that he said the thought of enduring it 1 minute longer was almost insupportable. The night before he died, he said of those around him that it was another thing to die than people imagined. 475, 476 pages. A despairing mind, Brainerd struggled with recurring depression. He was tormented again and again with the most desperate discouragements, and the marvel in that he survived and kept going at all. He often called his depression a kind of death. There are at least 22 places in the diary where he longed for death, and as a freedom from his misery. For example, Sunday, February 3, 1745, he wrote, "My soul remembered the wormwood and the gall, I might almost say hell, of Friday last, and I was greatly afraid I should be obliged again to drink of that cup of trembling, which was inconceivably more bitter than death, and made me long for to get to grave more, unspeakably more, than for hid treasures." 285. Only in retrospect did he see himself as a suitable object for the compassion of Jesus Christ, but in the hours of darkness he could sometimes feel no sense of hope, or love, or fear. This is the most fearful side of depression, since the natural restraint on suicide begins to vanish. But unlike William Com- Cowper, Brainerd was spared in the suicidal drive. His wishes for death were all restrained within the bounds of the biblical truth. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Job, Job 1:21. He wished for death many times, but only that God would take him. Life of David Brainerd, 172, 183, 187, 215, 259 for examples. It is simply amazing how often Brainerd pressed on with the practical necessities of his work in the face of these waves of discouragement. This had no doubt endeared him to many missionaries who knew firsthand the kind of pain he endured. A lonely soul, he tells of having to endure the profane talk of two strangers one night in April of 1743 and says, "Oh, I long that some dear Christian knew my distress." 204. A month later he says, "Most of the talk I heard is either Highland, Scottish, or Indian. I have no fellow Christian to whom I might unbosom myself and lay open my spiritual sorrows, and with whom I might take sweet counsel in conversation about heavenly things and join in social prayer." 207. This misery made him sometimes shrink back from going off on another venture. He wrote on Thursday, May 8, 1744, "My heart sometimes was ready to sink with the thoughts of my work, and going alone into wilderness I knew not where." 248. Brainerd has alone in his ministry to the end was alone in his ministry to the end. During the last 19 weeks of his life, Jerusha Edwards, Jonathan Edwards' 70-year-old daughter, was his nurse, and many speculate that there was deep, even romantic love between them. But in the wilderness and in the ministry he was alone, and could pour out his soul only to God, and God bore him and kept him going. Brainerd's response. We could go on to describe Brainerd's other struggles, his immense external hardships, his bleak outlook on nature, his trouble to love the Indians, his temptation to leave the field. But we turn now to how Brainerd responded to these struggles. What we are struck with immediately is that he pressed on. One of the main reasons Brandon's lives has such powerful effects on people is that in spite of all his struggles, he never gave up his faith or his ministry. He was consumed with a passion to finish his race and honor his master and spread the kingdom and advance in personal holiness. It was this unswerving allegiance to the cause of Christ that makes the bleakness of his life glow with glory. Among all the means that Brainerd used for pursuing greater and greater holiness and usefulness, prayer and fasting stand out above all. We read of him spending whole days in prayer. Wednesday, June 30, 1742, spent almost the whole day in prayer incessantly. 172. Sometimes he set aside as many as 6 periods of the day to pray. Blessed be God, I had much freedom 5 or 6 times in the day in prayer and praise, and felt a wakely concern upon my spirit for the salvation of those precious souls and the enlargement of the Redeemer's kingdom among them. 208:18. And along with prayer, Brainerd pursued holiness and usefulness with fasting. Again and again in his diary he tells of days spent in fasting. One of the most remarkable, in view of how most of us celebrate our birthdays, is the fast on his 25th birthday. Wednesday, April 20. Set apart this day for fasting and prayer, to bow my soul before God for the bestowment of divine grace, especially that all my spiritual afflictions and inward distresses might be sanctified to my soul. My soul was painted to think of my barrenness and deadness, that I have lived so little to the glory of the eternal God. I spent the day in the woods alone, and there poured out my complaint to God. Oh, that God would enable me to live to his glory for the future. 205. The fruits of Brain's afflictions. As a result of the immense impact of Brainerd's devotion on his life, Jonathan Edwards wrote in the next 2 years the life of David Brainerd, which has been reprinted more often than any of Edwards' other books, and through his life the impact of Brainerd on the Church has been incalculable, beyond all the famous ministries who tell us that they have been sustained and inspired by Brainerd's life. How many countless other unknown faithful servants must there be who have found from Brainerd's testimony the encouragement and strength to press on? It is an inspiring thought that one shall pebble dropped in the sea of history can produce waves of grace that break on distant shores hundreds of years later and thousands of miles away. Robert Glover ponders this thought with wonder when he writes, "It was Brainerd's holy life that influenced Henry Martyn to become a missionary and was a prime factor in William Carey's inspiration. Carey in turn moved Adoniram Judson, and so we trace the spiritual lineage from step to step. Huss, Wycliffe, Frankie, Zinzendorf, the Wesleys and Whitefield, Brainerd, Edwards, Carey, Judson, and ever onward in the true apostolic succession of spiritual grace and power and worldwide ministry, the progress of worldwide mission. 56. But the most lasting and significant effect of Brainerd's missionary is the same as the most lasting and significant effect of every pastor's ministry. There are a few Indians, perhaps several hundred, who, now and for eternity, owe their everlasting life to the direct love and ministry of David Brainerd. Who can describe the value of one soul transferred from the kingdom of darkness and from weeping and gnashing of teeth to the kingdom of God's dear Son? if we live 29 years or if we live 99 years with not any hardships be worth the saving of one person from the eternal torment of hell for the everlasting enjoyment of the glory of God. Onward and upward. I thank God for the ministry of David Brainerd in my own life, the passion for prayer, the spiritual feast of fasting, the sweetness of the Word of God, the unremitting perseverance through hardship, the relentless focus on the glory of God, the utter dependence on grace, the final resting in the righteousness of Christ, the pursuit of perishing sinners, the holiness while suffering, the fixing of the mind on what is eternal, and finishing well without cursing the disease that cut him down at age 29. With all his weakness and imbalances and sins, I love David Brainerd. Oh, that God would grant us a persevering grace to spread a passion for his supremacy in all things, like Brainerd, for the joy of all peoples. Life is too precious to squander on trivial things. Grant us, Lord, the unswerving resolve to pray and live with David Brainerd's urgency. Oh, that I might never loiter on my heavenly journey. 186 page. 21 Servants of the soaring joy, faithful, flawed, and fruitful. Thank to this man, John Piper, I could read this. I want to practice my English because my reading is not the best. Sadly, it is because that I did not devoted my time to this. I hope this helped you. I hope you are a Christian, or if not, this can help you. If you had thoughts of suicide, I believe this helped you also. And tell me, where can I pronounce better? May God bless you. Bye. Sziasztok, ez egy magyar videó, ez egy angol videó volt, remélem nem haragudtok meg.